If you've ever been passed over, pushed aside, or told to be grateful for less, this channel is for you. We share true stories of quiet strength, professional betrayal, and the powerful comebacks that follow. These aren't just stories about loss, they're stories about rising with dignity and winning without noise. If Dana's journey reminded you of your own, don't scroll past. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. Every week, we bring you inspiring stories of resilience, justice, and personal transformation, especially for those who've given years to a system that forgot their value. Like this video if it moved you. Comment below to share where you're watching from, or tell us your story. We're listening. Because you're not alone, and your next chapter might just begin here. I thought it was just a routine HR check-in, nothing more than a mid-year touch base. But the moment I stepped into room 306 at the Glendale office, I knew something was off. There sat Meredith, the HR manager, with her overly careful smile and folders always lined in pastel. Next to her was a man I didn't recognize, mid-40s, crisp charcoal blazer, minimalist watch, eyes like today was just another calendar entry. "This is Alex from corporate," Meredith said softly. "We appreciate everything you've done, Dana," she began, her voice dripping with that slow HR sympathy that made me want to bolt. "As part of Norhaven's operational rebalancing initiative, we're aligning compensation across all strategic verticals." I blinked. Alex wordlessly slid a document across the table. I opened it, scanning instinctively. My eyes caught on the bold figures in the center. New base salary, $56,000. Effective immediately. My current salary had been $140,000. My hands went cold. I looked at the page again, hoping the numbers would somehow change. They didn't. Meredith kept speaking, buzzwords like streamlining and market volatility echoing around me like static. But I couldn't hear a thing over the pounding in my chest. I forced a smile. "I'd like 24 hours to review this." She nodded, clearly relieved. "Of course." I walked out without another word. Past the bullpen I'd overseen for years. Past the printout of Q4 wins that still bore my signature. I made it to my car before the tears came, shoulders heaving, palms trembling, the kind of ugly sobbing that fogs the windshield. This wasn't a pay cut. It was a hit job in business casual. Eventually, I reached into my bag and unfolded the paper again. No severance. No retention bonus. Just one sentence at the bottom. Transition support will be provided if the employee cooperates. It hit me then. This wasn't an accident. It was strategic. It was planned. And it wasn't just cruel. It was corporate cruelty disguised as policy. I didn't land this job by accident. I clawed my way in. Back when Norhaven was just 5 people squeezed into a converted garage in Glendale, I was hired as a client support rep, making $42,000 a year, answering phones and fixing login issues while learning every piece of the back-end system. I stayed late, covered shifts no one else wanted, and worked holidays because I believed in what we were building. We were scrappy. Close-knit. The founder, Jeremy, knew every name. We toasted series of funding with sheet cake and gas station champagne. I used to bring my daughter, Lila, into the office. She'd sit under my desk drawing pictures while wheezing quietly on her inhaler. Colleagues smiled at us, told me I was inspiring, as if admiration could pay for prescriptions. When her dad left to find himself in Utah with a hiking instructor named Kendra, I didn't fall apart. I worked harder. I didn't have time to unravel. Over the next 9 years, I climbed from rep to manager to director of client solutions. I led a team of 8. I managed over 70% of our account revenue. I was the one clients called during midnight emergencies and last-minute rollouts. But somewhere along the way, I stopped asking for recognition. I thought results would speak for themselves. They didn't. Clients counted on me for everything: budget forecasts, rollout strategies, conflict resolution. I managed midnight escalations, early morning conference calls, and last-minute system launches that sent senior executives into a panic. I was always steady, always professional, never made a fuss. I had long since stopped waiting for recognition, assuming the work would be enough. It wasn't. After that HR meeting, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by old records, trying to understand what had happened. That's when I saw it. My promotion, celebrated at an offsite years ago, mentioned in a team-wide email, had never been formalized. No update to my official job title. No adjustment to my salary tier. Nothing reflected in the actual paperwork. For 4 years, I had been operating as Director of Client Strategy without legal acknowledgement, without financial parity, and without any contractual safety net. I had built the division, trained my team, and maintained our biggest accounts without the protection I had assumed was in place. And the truth? I never pressed the issue. I was too focused on keeping everything together. Making sure Lila had her prescriptions filled. Making sure clients never sensed that I'd been crying in the bathroom 15 minutes before a Zoom call. Managing crises while trying to survive one of my own. As I looked back on nearly a decade of missed birthdays, overlooked milestones, and raises that never arrived, a new feeling settled in. It wasn't just betrayal. It was exploitation, carefully calculated and systematically applied. And for the first time in 9 years, I stopped making excuses for them. I remember exactly when it began unraveling. They scheduled an all-staff meeting for 10 a.m. sharp. I tried to be hopeful. Really tried. Jeremy, our founder, stood at the front of the room in a faded Norhaven sweatshirt. His voice carried the usual warmth, but the spark was gone. His smile was mechanical. "This is a great step forward," he said. "Integrating with Cortex will give us the scale we need." People clapped. Some even cheered. But I watched Jeremy closely. He didn't meet anyone's eyes. By that afternoon, 3:15 p.m., our company emails had been rebranded. New signature. New logo. New boilerplate mission statement that sounded like it had been written by a consulting intern. Within a week, we were signed up for integration webinars and something called a team agility audit. Then came the quiet departures. First the interns. Then 2 junior account analysts. Then Sheila, one of the most experienced product leads I'd ever worked with. No announcements. No goodbyes. Just an empty desk and a Slack profile that stopped blinking green. Each disappearance followed the same script, a brief email from HR citing organizational efficiency. My team of 8 was soon whittled down to 5, then 3. By the next Monday morning, at 7:40 a.m., I was handling 14 major clients with only 2 remaining team members, both with barely 2 years of experience combined. I asked Alex, the regional corporate liaison, whether we'd be getting help. He gave me that same glossy smile. "We're going lean," he said. "It encourages adaptability." Adaptability? The job had taken over everything. I was answering emails while reheating leftovers, reviewing quarterly budgets with an aching neck at midnight, missing field trips and bedtime stories. One evening, Lila looked up at me and asked, "Why don't you smile anymore?" I said I was just tired. But the moment that truly shook me came the next day. I logged into a virtual meeting 5 minutes early, 9:05 a.m., only to hear 2 operations managers talking freely. "So, what's the timeline for Phase 3 restructuring?" one asked. My heart stopped. "Shoo," the other replied. "That's not public yet." They didn't know I was already in the meeting. And just like that, I realized something else was coming, and I was once again the last to know. "What?" The second voice cut in quickly. "That's not public information yet." I didn't move. Just stared at the screen, heart lodged somewhere in my throat. I wasn't even sure if they realized I was already logged in. Phase 3 restructuring. I hadn't seen it in any leadership roundup. It hadn't come up in our regional check-ins or the new budget roadmap. Nothing. And yet, they were already talking like it was set in stone. That night, long after Lila had gone to sleep, I laid in bed, eyes fixed on the cracks in the ceiling. My chest felt like it was being crushed from the inside out. My mind refused to shut off. What was phase 3? And more importantly, why was I left out of it? By 10:20 a.m. the following morning, I was seated across from Angela, my financial advisor. She was already scrolling through projections on her tablet, but I needed to hear it out loud. If this new salary structure starts immediately, she said gently, you'll need to cut roughly 40% from your monthly spending to stay financially stable. I nodded slowly. And Lila's prescriptions? Angela hesitated. She clicked into another worksheet, her fingers gliding across the keyboard in quiet calculation. Then she sat back. You'd have to drop your secondary coverage, which means out-of-pocket costs for her inhalers, nebulizer solutions, and any urgent visits. They'd triple. I finished the sentence for her, voice dull. Angela's eyes were soft. I'm so sorry, Dana. I stared at the desk between us. The edges of the laminate had been worn down over time, probably by people in the same position, pressing their fingers there, digging in just to hold themselves together. They know, I murmured. Angela looked up. Who does? HR, Cordex. It's on my medical forms. They know about Lila's asthma, the treatments, the costs. They knew I wouldn't risk losing our coverage. That's why they cut so deep, because they knew I'd hesitate. She didn't respond. I didn't cry. I was too far beyond that. What I felt wasn't sadness anymore. It was the kind of fatigue that lives in your bones. That lingers even after a full night's sleep. By mid-afternoon, I was back at my desk pretending to work. My screen showed a client invoice template, untouched for over an hour. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, but I couldn't type. All I could do was relive the last 24 hours on a loop, searching for some kind of exit. That's when I saw it. A yellow sticky note. I hadn't seen anyone approach. I hadn't heard footsteps. It wasn't there before I went to lunch. But now it sat quietly on my keyboard, 5 small words written in slanted black ink. Check your original agreement. I looked around instinctively. Devin was on a video call. Priya's hands were flying across her keyboard. Maria hadn't come in today. No one glanced my way. I picked up the note and tucked it into my bag like a secret. That night, once Lila was asleep around 8:15 p.m., I walked into my home office and opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. A place I hadn't touched in years. The old Norhaven documents were still there, dusty, slightly curled at the corners from age. I began flipping through folders slowly, like I might disturb something fragile. I wasn't exactly hopeful, but something inside me had shifted like a tiny click in a locked door. Someone had left that note for a reason. Someone thought there was still something in those files that mattered. By 9:15 the next morning, I was sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by manila envelopes and cold coffee. I told myself I was just looking for backup paperwork, something procedural. But I knew better. The original Norhaven folder was at the very bottom, worn and slightly torn at the edges. I opened it, hoping no, expecting answers. I opened the folder with deliberate care, flipping past onboarding forms, old tax documents, and offer letters until I found what I hadn't realized I'd been looking for, my original signed agreement, dated almost 10 years ago. And there it was. Clause 4, subsection B. In the event of any decrease in base compensation exceeding 30%, the employee maintains the right to terminate their position immediately without obligation to provide advance notice or transitional services. I read it once, then again, and a third time for good measure. It was airtight, unchanged, never revised through any of the transitions, acquisitions, or endless policy refreshes we'd been subject to. It had been forgotten. But I hadn't. I leaned back, the contract resting in my lap. For the first time in over a week, my pulse felt steady. They had believed I was trapped, that I'd absorb the blow, carry on out of necessity. But they'd overlooked something. Something buried deep, yet still intact. Something that gave me options. By 11:20 a.m., I was scrolling through my inbox, searching for anything else that might hold significance. Almost absent-mindedly, I toggled over to LinkedIn. Notifications swarmed the screen, connection requests, recruiter spam, some leftover kudos from when I'd been promoted. But one message caught my eye. Subject: Quick chat, Marcus Lynn. I froze. Marcus Lynn, Vice President of Strategic Development at Sendrix, Cordexa's most aggressive competitor. We'd crossed paths once at a conference in San Diego. He'd complimented my team's account retention strategy during a Q&A panel. I hadn't thought about him since. His message was brief, direct. Hi, Dana. I realize this may come as a surprise, but we're building something big this quarter, and your name has come up more than once. If you're open to a quick conversation, I'd love to connect. I think there's real potential here. It had been sent 3 days ago. I hadn't even seen it. I stared at the message, my hands hovering above the keyboard. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe it was everything. But one thing I knew with certainty, I wasn't going to stay silent and accept what I didn't deserve. Not anymore. I reached for my phone. In one hand, I held a contract they had forgotten to nullify. In the other, a message that offered possibility. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was holding the cards. At 7:20 a.m. the following morning, I sat in my car outside Red Fern Coffee, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Lila had asked why I looked like I was going to court before school drop-off. I smiled and told her I had a big meeting. She didn't need to know the rest. Not yet. Inside, the cafe buzzed with the sound of espresso machines and quiet morning chatter. A few early risers were lost in their screens. I spotted Marcus right away, tall, composed, drinking something green that probably tasted like lawn clippings. Dana Merrill, he said as he stood, extending his hand. I'm glad you came. Marcus, I nodded, shaking his hand. It's been a minute. He gestured to the seat across from him. Not long enough, apparently. Your name keeps surfacing, clients, partners, even a few folks we've recently hired. I tilted my head. Is that so? Marcus leaned in slightly, dropping his voice just enough to make me listen closer. Word gets around. When someone like you gets sidelined, people pay attention. Not just to the numbers, but to the silence that follows. I didn't answer right away. My instincts were cautious. Polished executives knew how to say the right thing. But Marcus didn't sound like he was reading from a script. There was intent behind his words. Something real. His tone wasn't just polite, it was intentional. So, what exactly are we talking about here? I asked, narrowing my eyes slightly. Marcus smiled, easy and direct. We're growing fast. In the past quarter, we've onboarded 4 substantial mid-tier accounts. We're building a new department focused entirely on enterprise-level client retention and experience. And we need someone capable to lead it. Someone who's already done the work. I blinked, processing. Is this a job offer? It's more than that, he replied. It's independence. You'd come in as Director of Strategic Partnerships. You'd assemble your own team, design the strategy, and steer the vision. Starting package is $165 plus equity and full health benefits for dependents. No relocation. We want you rooted right where you are. I sat there, stunned. This wasn't just an opportunity, it was validation. The kind I hadn't felt in years. To be noticed. Valued. Heard. Then he added, almost offhand, your former analyst, Jenna Ortiz, she's been with us since March. She's been helping us evaluate Cordexa's servicing gaps. She still has visibility into some benchmarks, actually. My eyes widened. Jenna? She never said a word. She didn't tell me. She wouldn't, Marcus replied. She's loyal. But she made one thing clear, she wouldn't share anything unless we brought you on board. Suddenly, things started aligning. The pieces weren't just moving, they had been moving all along. I reached for my coffee, took a slow breath, and met his gaze. All right, I said. I'm listening. And, for the first time in a long while, I meant it. By 8:50 a.m. the next morning, I stepped back through the glass entrance of Norhaven's Glendale office. My outfit was deliberate, tailored, sharp, and confident. My bag carried only 3 things: my original contract, a clean notepad, and the type of quiet certainty that comes when you've already decided you're done. Mara from HR was waiting for me at reception. She didn't make small talk as she led me down the corridor to the same dimly lit meeting room they'd used last week. The air was dry and overly chilled, the blinds still drawn. Across the table, Victor, one of the senior managers, was already seated, flipping through a folder as if it mattered. "Dana," he said, barely glancing up. "Thanks for coming in. We're hoping to settle things today." I smiled politely and took a seat. "I've made my decision. But before we get to that, I have a few questions regarding the handoff." Mara straightened. "Of course. Go ahead." I opened my notepad. "The HarperTech deployment scheduled for early next month. Who's taking that over?" Victor hesitated. "Still under internal review." "And the Redwood Logistics renewal?" I asked, flipping to the next line. "Elias requested to work directly with me. Who's been assigned in my place?" Another pause. "That's being reassessed." I raised a brow. "So there's no confirmed replacement for either of our highest revenue contracts?" Victor's jaw tightened. "We're exploring options." I nodded slowly. "Interesting." Neither of them noticed my phone buzz on the table at 9:04 a.m. I didn't pick it up right away. "And the team?" I asked. "Devin, Priya, Maria, has anyone communicated a leadership change to them?" Mara shifted uncomfortably. "That'll be addressed after your exit documentation is finalized." I leaned back slightly in my chair. "So I'm expected to walk away from 9 years of client trust and team cohesion and hand over everything without knowing if any of it will be handled properly?" Before they could respond, I checked my phone. It was a message from Sonia West. Subject: "Missing you in this morning's review. Hi Dana. Just checking in. Our quarterly strategy meeting started at 8:30. We were expecting you to lead the account briefing. Did I miss something?" I allowed myself the smallest smile, then looked up again. And for the first time in this whole process, I knew they hadn't just lost me. They were about to lose a whole lot more. "Hope you're doing okay. Just a quick check-in. Our Q2 planning session began at 8:30 this morning, and we had you down to lead the forecast review. Was there a change I missed?" I glanced at the email, then at Victor and Mara across the table. "Actually," I said calmly, "I think the people who actually matter are beginning to realize what's been missing." That was the turning point. That's when I knew this wasn't just about me walking away. This was about what and who would follow. By 9:20 a.m., the quiet in the conference room had become uncomfortable. Victor sat upright but rigid, eyes fixed on paperwork he clearly wasn't reading. Mara kept trying to appear composed, but her eyes flicked toward the wall clock more often than she probably realized. I slipped my phone into my purse and folded my hands in front of me. "I've made my decision," I said, voice calm and deliberate. Effective immediately, I resigned from my position with No Haven Solutions. Mara's expression faltered. Victor didn't even raise his head. "I'm afraid that's not an option," he said, voice cool. "Leadership-level resignations require a formal notice period and a written transition plan for your clients." "No," I replied evenly. "Not under my original employment terms." I paused just long enough to let that land. Section 4, Clause B. Any decrease in base salary of 30% or more allows for immediate resignation without prior notice or handoff responsibilities. Victor's pen stopped midair. Mara started flipping through her binder, clearly looking for something she didn't have. "I don't think we have that version," she said. "Of course you don't," I said without missing a beat. "It was never revised post-acquisition. You never issued amended terms. You never voided the original contract. You didn't do your due diligence." Victor's jaw tensed. "Even so, we expect a cooperative exit. And I expect you to honor what you signed," I said. "You cut my compensation by over 60%. You dismantled my role. That was your choice. This," I stood slowly, "is mine." Neither of them said anything as I walked out. Back at my desk, something had shifted. Maria turned from her screen, her eyes searching mine. Devin stood halfway from his chair. "Is it over?" he asked in a hushed voice. I nodded. "Yeah, it's done." I didn't waste time. I packed methodically. One framed photo of Lila. A backup inhaler. My worn leather notebook filled with nearly a decade of client call logs, notes, and sketches. One small box. That's what my 9 years had boiled down to. Just as I was about to head out, Caleb, the intern who never spoke much, walked up beside me. He didn't say anything, just placed something into my hand and kept walking. A USB drive. I looked down, then turned to catch him, but he was already gone. By 9:45 a.m., I was in the elevator, breath shallow but focused. This wasn't anxiety. It was clarity. I didn't have to guess what the drive contained. I had a strong feeling since the parking lot. Beside my car, I stared at the small device for a second longer, then slipped it into my purse. They thought I was leaving empty-handed. They were wrong. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel minimized. I felt in control, strategic, decisive. I wasn't just leaving, I was leveling up. By 8:15 the next morning, I stepped through the entrance of Sendrix's downtown office, not as a visitor, but as their newly appointed director of strategic partnerships. No balloons. No pep rally. Just a nameplate already on the desk, a laptop humming to life without friction, and an environment so still and focused, it felt like the opposite of everything I'd just escaped. I unpacked slowly. Lila's photo went next to the monitor. My old Norhaven notebook, now a relic of lessons learned, I set just off to the side, not to revisit, but to remember. Not what was lost, but what I rebuilt. I kept telling myself this was a fresh chapter, a clean beginning. But deep down, I knew better. By 9:30 that morning, my inbox had already chimed 5 times. All familiar names. All from Norhaven's old portfolio. Sonia West, Mark Chen, Tom Ridley. I hadn't reached out to a single one of them. Each message said some version of the same thing. "Heard you transitioned. Can we talk?" They brought in someone new. "It's not working. Do you have time next week?" I didn't rush to respond. I knew how it would look from the outside. I wasn't here to recruit or retaliate. But I also wasn't about to pretend like they didn't matter to me, or that I didn't matter to them. At 10:58 a.m., a new message arrived from Caleb, the quiet intern who had handed me the USB drive the day I left. It was a screenshot, forwarded through a back channel, clearly from someone in Norhaven's IT department. No pleasantries. No context. Just a time-stamped chain between 2 executives. Dana Merrill's departure addresses our Q3 budget constraint. Use clause 14C to block any severance claims if she resigns. Saves roughly $88,000 in annual payroll and benefits. Push the exit before fiscal deadline. Dated 3 days before my HR ambush. Subject: Q3 Financial Adjustment Strategy. Merrill exit. I didn't feel surprised. I didn't even feel hurt. What settled in was something colder. Heavier. The kind of anger that doesn't scream or throw punches, it just sharpens. They hadn't stumbled into this. They'd engineered it. They used my daughter's medical dependency as leverage, my silence as a shield, and then scripted a clean dismissal behind the scenes. I stared at the email for a full minute. Then I saved it, encrypted on a private drive. Not as ammunition. As documentation. As truth. By 12:20 p.m., 2 more voicemails had landed, again from longtime clients, not colleagues. I hadn't reached out to anyone, and yet the tide was already turning. I wasn't chasing the shift. It was coming to me. At 10:05 a.m. the following week, under gray skies and steady rain, I sat in a sleek glass-walled room at a mediation center just 2 blocks from Sendrix's main building. No media. No lawsuits. Just a mediator, 2 attorneys, myself, and a representative from Norhaven's legal department, his name barely registered. I didn't need a stage. All I brought were 5 items. a hard copy of my original employment agreement, 3 formal instances of retaliation, my signed resignation letter, a detailed breakdown of the 9 years of client performance I personally managed, and the drive containing what Caleb had quietly handed me. Their legal counsel flipped through the documents in silence. The mediator turned to me. "Would you like to add anything before we conclude?" "Yes," I replied, measured and firm. "I didn't take anything. I didn't coerce or poach. What I did was build. I created something with integrity. If your firm decided not to safeguard that investment, what follows isn't my responsibility." They offered a modest settlement, an attempt to quietly close the chapter. I declined. At 11:52 a.m., I stepped into the light rain outside, breathing easier than I had in months. 3 days later, it became official. I accepted a new title, Senior Vice President of Strategic Growth at Sendrix. My compensation more than doubled. I was granted full autonomy to shape the department as I saw fit. Jenna joined full-time as Director of Data Strategy. Maria came next. Devin soon after. But the most telling part? I never pitched. I never solicited. I never asked. They came. At 8:40 a.m. one quiet Thursday, Sonia West called to say Westfield had formally ended their relationship with Norhaven and moved all business to Sendrix. "This isn't about the company," she said over coffee. "It's about the person. We work with people we trust." "It's not about your firm," Sonia said, cupping her coffee. "It's about you. We don't align with branding. We align with people we trust." By the close of the month, 4 additional accounts made the same move: Alder Group, Briarwood Systems, Tetracorp Logistics, and Halverson Partners. Each departure was discreet, structured, and purposeful. And each exit memo said the same thing in different ways. "We're continuing our partnership with Ms. Dana Merrill." Just like that, nearly $40 million in annual revenue shifted hands, not because I made noise, but because I didn't flinch when they tried to write me off. I remember sitting in my new office at Sendrix, late afternoon, the city drizzle trailing down the window in familiar streaks, just like the day I was told my salary would be slashed by more than half. They assumed my calm meant I had no power. They mistook silence for surrender. But silence isn't always passive. It can be intentional, measured, focused like a scalpel. And when wielded with clarity, it becomes the move they never see coming. So, if you've ever been told you're expendable, invisible, or just lucky to be included, hear this. You matter. You don't owe your silence to anyone. But if you choose to hold it, let it be purposeful. Let it be the foundation beneath something stronger. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it walks away, and everything worth keeping follows.